How's that?
Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Slancha! Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel. Thank you for coming back. It's the After Dram. It means it's time to unwind. It's time to grab a dram. I'd say 2, but I already drank the other dram. I should have filled it up again. As a quick recap to our afternoon and Patrick's evening, Joss, Rich, and I have been given a top-notch tour of the Zuidam distillery. We've talked about family. We've talked about rye. We've talked about whiskey and barrels, and we're going to get back to it. It was fun. It was informative, and it was terribly tasty. It was very, very good. But we're going to have another round of introductions. So we're going to go through Joss and Rich and Patrick again. Again, please tell us what your other handles are. And Joss, how about you introduce what we have in our glasses today, buddy? What do we got?
Hey, well, are we doing the whole introduction? Well, whatever. Joss, Dram Society, up north, enjoying whiskey. Do the compact version. Yeah, we are doing the Millstone 100 rye whiskey, and just mentioning that I've had one sitting here for an hour, and I just kind of poured a little quick sample to see how the nose is changing over time. Won't get into it because now we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but already some noticeable differences. So very excited to dig into this one and get into the nuances. This is Rich.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. It is still morning over here. Patrick, thanks for these breakfast drams. Rich Lee, We Rock Whiskey on Twitter, and again, Millstone Rye tonight or this morning, and super stoked to be here in this rainy West Coast day. Cheers.
Awesome.
I'm Patrick. I'm master distiller at Zuidam Distillers, and I make the stuff.
I make it, and you make some very good stuff. And it's Millstone 100. That's where we are. That's what we're tasting. And I'm Dolph. I'm the president of the Alberta Scotch Society, founder of this and the Whiskey Book Club, and I'm the spirit of Yag. That's me. Hi, how you doing? Thank you, gentlemen, for coming back. I'm excited to talk about, and again, I said this is my favorite rye over the past 3 years. Not this specific one. And I told Patrick why before. I'm going to say it to you, though, everyone else. So this is the one, but my very, very favorite of possibly my life was the Millstone 100, but it was a individual cask that was sold to Kensington Wine Market and Keg and Cork here in Alberta. And I only bought 2, and I should have bought more. And I was done, I think, probably at Christmas or just before Christmas. And I've been enjoying these. There's a little bit of a difference between that one and this one.
This is much older.
Well, while we talk about this, Patrick, tell me the difference between this one, and I think you remember the one I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, it's a bottling we did for Keg and Cork and
Kensington Wine Market.
Kensington, yeah. And actually, they did a new bottling this year.
Yes, and I bought that as well. But it's not as good as the first one, Patrick. I've got to say that.
Actually, this one is actually also really nice. But this is the beauty of our business is that we all find things that we like in these drams. Basically the mash bill is the same. It's 100% rye mash bill. It's a very secret mash bill of 50% rye and 50% malted rye. And then it's fermented for, 9-10 days in temperature-controlled fermentation using a mixture of Red Star distilling yeast and an English ale yeast, actually. So we mix an ale yeast with a distilling yeast for this one. And that is aged in Virgin American oak. And all of them are exactly the same. But with single casks, of course, you always get that kind of expression of that particular cask that you don't get when you do a fatting like the one you have in the glass now, of course, is a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old rye whiskey, which is a little bit older, and then it loses a little bit, of course, of that freshness of the young whiskey, but you gain a little bit more layers of flavor. So it's It's an expression that offers different things than the young cask strength one.
Does. And I just wanted to say, so it's 100 rye. The reason for that, it's 100 proof. It's 100 months old, 100% rye grain, 100% small batch, 100% milled by Dutch windmills, 100% small pot still distillation, 100% new American oak, and 100% handmade. And so 100% proof being 50%. So that's right up our wheelhouse. We love the higher percent. But it's not overpowering. And this is important because a lot of ryes, and you get the ryes into the 50% range, and especially in the States, they become very hot. And this
but
one
those
is
are
not.
column distilled, Dolph.
Yes.
So there's a difference with what we do and what they do. Every distillation method has got their own merits. So column distillation have their place. And of course, it's a more economical way of distilling than this stupid batch distilling that we do, and especially doing, when I asked Forsyths to build these stills behind me, and I told him that I wanted to do rye whiskey in the same stills I wanted to do malt whiskey in, Richard Forsyth kind of looked at me like I was, off my rocker. And sorry?
He was thinking you were crazy.
Yeah, nobody does rye whiskey in a pot still like that. He said, but yeah, I like my stills to be versatile. I want my stills to be, able to do all the products that I want to do in the same stills. So yeah, it works, and it works beautifully actually. But yeah, for them it was a completely new. They never did anything like that before. So for them it was a new still that they built that they had never done before for anybody else. But the pot still distillation gives you something different from a column still. So column still are really good at stripping out higher alcohols. So what we call fusel oils, this kind of grainy, fatty flavors. And pot stills are notoriously bad at that same process. So if you want to achieve that kind of similar stripping, then you would have to distill over and over and over again, and before you achieve that.
And we don't want to achieve that. We want that feeling. We love the mouthfeel.
It depends on what you want to achieve, of course, Dolph. It's what you want, and I agree, of course, with you, because I don't have a column still. I like that richness, that oiliness, that fattiness that comes off the pot still. And that's of course why we love pot stills. We are a bit, hung up on pot stills because I like that particular mouthfeel that you get from this. If you taste this rye and you taste an American rye next to it, it's that mouthfeel is completely different. A pot still has got that kind of velvety quality to it that you will never get off a column. That doesn't mean that column stills are not good, but they produce a different quality of new make.
Well,
and of course, pot stills give you the opportunity for cuts. So you go in a pot still, I can make cuts in my distillation process, and where you select certain, and you can emphasize certain qualities of your whiskey, and that you cannot do with a column still either. So column stills are basically stripping out higher congeners, so higher alcohols and fusel oils, and leaving all the esters in place. With a pot still, you can select, maybe take out a little bit of the ethyl acetate, maybe take out a little bit of the really heavy fusel oils. But you can also leave exactly the same amount of fusel oils that you want.
And we're happy you did. And we're going to give Joss and Richard a little bit of time to taste this over and over again before we get their comments on it. But I want to come back to the wood, because wood is a big focus, a big part of the end product that you have. And I've always wondered what process you and someone who uses a lot of different woods as well go through in deciding what they're going to pick and which barrels are more important. So here's my question. So does it all start for you with a broker, or do you have relationships with various distilleries, vineyards, coopers?
Both. So so the American oak comes from the cooperages directly, So I don't buy through a broker. I have them made, special order. So I want galvanized hoops. I want toasting, and I want a charring level that I decide, and I want the heads charred as well, and not just the staves, but also the heads I want charred. So that is important, that you can decide exactly what kind of cask you are buying. And for the sherry cask and the other cask, of course, you have to rely on either connections with wineries or bodegas, or brokers that intermediate between you and the bodega.
Okay, and say the ones you get from Jerez, Spain. Do you go there? Do you trust people? So you say, I want this, and you might have people that that can actually choose barrels for you, or do you really not trust people all that much? And you're going and you're picking your Oloroso, PX, Final, Muscatel, Amarone, Manzanilla. You go to pick those ones specifically, or not?
Most of the times, you trust people because we are a family distillery. So we are a family-owned, family-run, and that means that you form long-term relationships with your suppliers. Not always looking for the best price, but you look for suppliers that can provide you with the type of casks that you want without you having to travel to Spain every drop of a hat to buy the next batch. So you need to be able to trust people as well. Either the bodegas where you buy from directly, or the intermediaries that collect the casks and sometimes recooper them into smaller casks if that's necessary. So sometimes, because sherry casks, of course, are all 500-liter butts. But once they get to a certain age, the wood sometimes get a little bit delicate, and the bad staves might have to be replaced or have to be recoopered into 250-liter hogsheads. So you recooper them in smaller casks, and that, of course, has also a delicate process that has to be done without a lot of heat, because if you heat the sherry in the staves too much, you get this kind of burnt sugary that you don't want in the casks. So you have to trust people to do what they do best.
So Patrick, you don't STR, so shave, toast, and rechar your barrels then?
I got some STR because some friend of mine. I got a friend, of course, that Dan from Cotswolds. I don't know if you know Dan. But Dan, of course, does some STRs, and I said, Patrick, why don't you try that? So of course, we had some STRs done, and those are now in the warehouse somewhere. I haven't even tasted them yet.
Okay, so I was going to ask. So you don't know if you like them. You're going to go that way.
We do full maturations, as you know, Dolph. So full maturations take time.
Gotta wait. Okay, that's good. But they've been doing STR casts for a while, right? And Cotswolds did it right from the very beginning. But so I'm eagerly awaiting to see what that's like for you. My second question, and same thing. And this came from a really good article from the Whiskey Wash that focused on the casks. And they talked about, again, the Fino, Muscatel, Amarone, Manzanilla casks. I want to know, what are the initial decisions that you have to make in regards to these casks in relation to where you're going to put them? So I know you're comparing them with the liquid, making sure that it doesn't overpower each other.
Yes.
But is there something else, like the most important thing when you're trying to pair them, to match them up? So what's number one?
Yeah, because you do full maturations, you always have to trust the cask that you put it in from the start. So you buy a cask and you put the new make in there, and you have to trust that it will do its job.
Okay.
So in this case, you look for what you think is balancing flavor. So the flavors from the sherry cask need to be, balanced by the new make whiskey. So, like the rye whiskey you have there.
Yep.
Rye whiskey, that new make is already a big, fatty, oily new make.
Wow.
It's a big, big boned girl, I would say, and that can stand up to virgin oak casks perfectly. It's not a problem whatsoever. Then again, if I put my unpeated new make in there, my unpeated malt whiskey new make in there, that is rather delicate. So if I put that unpeated new make into that cask, I'm not sure it will stand up to the test of time.
Okay.
So you look for casks that are, helping each other. The flavors have to help each other.
So what would you put in manzanilla?
Actually, I did because sometimes you simply don't know.
Okay.
Because
You're guessing. I know. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know. So I put actually lots of different stuff in there. I put in Genevers. I put in unpeated whiskey, peated whiskey, rye whiskey, and rum. So a lot of different stuff in there. Because I didn't have a lot of experience with Manzanilla cask, and I don't have the money anyway. So my main focus is on Oloroso and PX, of course. And I have to say the peated new make does extremely well with Moscatel. I think that is really interesting marriage between the two. Sorry?
I wouldn't have guessed that, so it's a good thing that you were actually experimenting, I think.
Yes.
Right.
So you start with a couple of casks, and if that turns out right, you buy some more. Basically, it's like trial and error.
Okay, so we say number one is your thought how to match them so that they match up well, and number two, it's experimentation, kind of, or just
you just try it, and of course you have experience. Once you learn over time.
Okay, that's good. Let's go back to more barrels because you have Geneva rum, malt wine there. Have you matured your whiskeys in your other barrels for your other spirits that you've had?
No.
No. Okay. Why not? Then you have all these barrels.
Why not? Because Geneva and whiskey are so close.
Okay.
I've actually put malt whiskey in rye whiskey casks. So the rye whiskey cask that I empty, of course, they get refilled either with Geneva or with malt whiskey new make, both peated and unpeated. So that does get reused. But I have to say the Genevers are flavor-wise so related to the malt whiskey that if I sell you a bottle and I say it's matured in a Geneva cask, you want to taste it and you want to have it taste differently from the normal malt whiskey. And I think that is the problem with that they're too close together.
Okay. Well, and then let's go to your liqueurs. And you've got the, I think you still do an orange.
Yeah, I do an orange liqueur. Yeah, that was actually my father's recipe.
And you still do that. And so I wanted to come back to that. Would you use that with something, or is that too sweet? Possibly.
Actually, that is not aged. We buy an XO cognac for that. So that is we distill fresh oranges. Both bitter and sweet oranges from Spain.
Okay.
And that distillate is mixed with an XO cognac. So it doesn't need to be matured any longer. It's already, the cognac is already done, basically.
Got it. Okay. So that's the extent of your experimentation. You're not taking anything else in your distillery and just throwing stuff in there. I like the idea of a mad scientist, like throw them in, everything.
Yeah, but it has to, this is also not just like a lab. This is also a production facility. So everything you do also has to, at the end of the day, it has to sell or be useful to in any way.
I still like the mad scientist idea going there.
I am a bit of a mad scientist, but sometimes I get told off by my brother that I also have to produce stuff.
That's good. How about your father? Let's go back to Dad. When you started doing these things and changing and buying these barrels, was he more hesitant, or was he like, yeah, go for it, have fun?
He was like, go for it, but be careful because we don't have much money. So, I can still remember the first time I did rye whiskey. I did about 8,000 liters of it. And when it came off the still, it was so gorgeous. It was so awesome new make. It was fruity. It was interesting. It had depth of flavor. It was, a bit grainy from the higher alcohols, but it was awesome. And then, of course, I filled 40 barrels with it, which, of course, back then was so much money. And
Okay.
No, we hardly could afford to do that. And then, of course, I can never wait until they're finished. So after a year, I opened them
Mm.
and I tasted them, and they were awful, awful. They
Oh,
were just disgusting. The higher alcohols had peaked at that moment, and the fruitiness was all gone and developed by that woody tannins from the new oak. So basically, it was not a big success. So I thought, am I gonna tell the rest of the family about it?
okay.
Have they asked? And no.
No.
So let's not tell anybody and wait and see. And it took actually 3 years before
It came
it
back.
actually became nice again. But that first year was not a good idea. So sometimes you just have to let things be and don't, taste them too early because they have to take their time developing.
Perfect. Okay. And I think you were probably scared at that point. You came back and it's like, oh my God, I've invested all this in
Yes,
those. And you
because
want, okay. That would have
cost
been a
is
hard
about
one.
1,500 euros per barrel, so 40 barrels was a lot of money.
Okay.
And money we didn't have at the moment. So yeah, that moment in time. So yeah, that hurt.
It
So I
worked.
didn't actually produce rye whiskey the year after that. So there was also a gap in my production because I had 40 barrels,
Yeah.
and then I have that year and a half that I didn't produce any
No
rye
whiskey.
whiskey. So I still have problems with that gap in the production. Still to this date,
It messed you up. Okay. Okay. Well, I think it was worth it. I think it's worth it, Patrick, because I love the rye. So, Joss and Richard, any questions from you gentlemen before I go on and change to a different kind of theme?
I've got a couple, but Rich, if you want to go first, okay. All right, I'll shoot. Some of them were answered along the way. Some of that was, do you? We
He's
talked a
scared
little
of you,
bit
Josh.
why you wouldn't finish rye necessarily in fancy wine barrels, and that you actually had worked with Moscatel. I caught that in the comments, which is my favorite cask. But we were talking a little bit about the experimentation and how. So I'm going to go back to brewing because that's what I'm more familiar with as in terms of a process. But if you have a brewery and you want to do some crazy beer, you usually have a very small rig that you can kind of fit throw all your ingredients in and see what happens. I know obviously with something like a whiskey, you have to age it regardless. So you're kind of at the mercy of time and your equipment. But for some of your, maybe let's say some more of your, crazier liqueur ideas, do you guys have a smaller set of equipment you experiment on first? Or you just kind of really try to hash it out and think, I think this could work, and then just go full scale and hope for the best?
Well, my smallest still at the moment is 800 liters. So that is my small experimentation still. We use that mainly for liqueurs and for ingredients for liqueurs. As it comes to whiskey and experimentation with whiskey, if I try out something new, I usually try it out full scale.
Okay.
The reasoning behind it is because, one, fermentation processes are notorious for behaving differently in different size fermenters. So rye whiskey in a small fermenter is hideously difficult to do right. And if you do it in a big fermentation vessel, like the ones we have are 15 or 30,000 liters, it never goes wrong. So it is sometimes better to use a full-scale equipment because fermentation processes do not always scale very well. So the yeast behave differently in different settings. So different tanks and different formats, different sizes. The yeast just simply behaves differently, and also the bacteria, of course, because we don't sterilize our equipment on purpose because we want some of that flora that's in the air and the natural yeast and the wild yeast and the bacteria that's in the air. We want that a sense of terroir to influence the whiskey, but of course you can imagine that always again different size fermentation vessels will give you different influences because of the size of the vessel and the balances, but the balance between the air and the inside the vessel. So no, I usually do full scale productions, and fingers crossed that it doesn't go horribly wrong.
Got one more for you if there's time, Dolph. But
Absolutely.
I'm just going to roll with this one. This is a bit more of a political one, but and might be hard to answer because obviously
good.
you
I
are
like politics.
you are where you are. Well, it's not heavy, but where I guess I'm going with it has to do with cask selection. So, like, I wonder, whenever, and they're not as prevalent over here, but whenever we have a Canadian expression or an American expression that they finish in, let's say, some sort of fancy wine cask or a premium grade European oak cask. We get what we get over here. And I know, like, a lot of the times people will travel over and they'll select the casks and stuff that they want to use. But do you think that being where you are in Europe, being so close to Spain, so close to France, if you want to have access to like a cognac cask or something like that, do you think that gives you an advantage in terms of what casks are available to you? Or is that completely based on relationships? So if you have a very good relationship with a particular, sorry, got a little minis around your knee right here.
Oh,
Right
it's
now.
adorable,
I
man.
guess to summarize it, do you think that your cask collection is due to your geography, or is it more of a one-to-one relationship with the distillery and the different cooperages?
I think it's a lot of it is the relationship that you build. We buy from the same people year after year, decade after decade. We don't switch suppliers often, only when the suppliers cannot meet the demand that you are putting to them. So a lot of it is due to your connection and your personal relationship. These people are all friends as well as suppliers. But the next thing is, and that's funny that you would mention that, is that the distance does make a difference, because especially with wine cask, for example, Josh, if so wine is a very perishable product, yeah. So as soon as you, maybe she has a good question, Josh. But as soon as you take the wine out of the cask, the wine that is in the staves starts to oxidize. So the distance from your location to the winery makes a huge difference. Either if you ship it for a long way, or for over a long period of time, especially in warm weather, then you would either have to sulfur the cask, and you and I both know that sulfuring casks in a whiskey setting or a rum setting is not our preferred way of doing things. Or you have to do some other kind of preservation on the cask to make sure that the cask is not gone bad before it reaches the distillery. So if you ship from here to Japan, from Europe to Japan, that is a long way, or from here to Canada, from here to the US, that is a long way to travel for these casks. And for virgin oak, there's not a problem, but for wine casks, especially for wine casks, especially for what do you call that? Not high alcoholic wines. So the lower alcoholic the wine is, and the less sweet it is, the more perishable it is. So that distance makes a difference on how you have to treat the cask. So if they're freshly emptied, I'll just put them in a truck and take them to the distillery and fill them as they come in, and you don't have to treat them at all. So that is an advantage.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Richard, do you have a question?
I do. Actually, I want to go back to the rye. Just to preface it, I'm new to the whole rye journey. At least I had a question a couple of minutes ago here. So I'm very interested in finding out. You started distilling the rye, making the rye a few years ago. What was your goal? What were your targets in terms of your flavor profiles? What were your inspirations in terms of were there ryes out there already that were on the market that you were like, that's the flavor profile that I want? Or was it more along the lines of, hey, I'm just going to throw some stuff out there, see what happens. I want it to be sort of Dutch flavored, or how did that go? What were you sort of aiming for?
It's actually a very interesting question. I love American rice, and a Canadian rice. They're wonderful products. So that is something that I really liked. But you have to keep in mind that rye has been part of Dutch distilling heritage for hundreds, if not thousands of years. because now we grow the grain that we want to distill for the flavor profile that we want to achieve.
Yeah.
But 200 years ago, people distilled the grain that was left over. And as nobody wanted to eat the fucking rye, that was the grain that was left over and was distilled. And I think now I have to actually, we grow it ourselves also because it's so hard to buy good quality rye for distilling these days. So rye has been part of Dutch distilling heritage for centuries. And because it's always been the grain that is here where we are, distillery, we have really, 200 years ago, this was really poor sandy soils. So in that sandy soil, grains that needed a lot of nutrients didn't want to grow. So what grew here was rye, because that was a almost weed-like grain that you couldn't stop it from growing. It's like a the grass in your patio. Yeah, it will grow anywhere. It doesn't need much in the way of nutrients. It doesn't need much in the way of water. So it was something that grew here where we are now. Rye was a grain that was grown because it's the only fucking thing that wanted to grow here.
And it's wind resistant and it's rain resistant. There's things that
it's a resilient grain. Yes. Yeah. But it's also at the same time, Dolph, it's also a very old-fashioned grain. Because I don't know if you've seen wheat these days, but wheat is like this high, 30 centimeters, 40 centimeters high. That's it. It doesn't grow higher than that because everything has to go into that
the stalk,
into the kernels. Yeah. And rye is one of those grains that nobody thought was interesting enough to do, a lot of genetic experimentation with it. So it's basically very much the same as it was a couple of 100 years ago. The only selection that they did was for resistance to, mycotoxins and things like that, and diseases, but not so much on the height of the grain. So it stands tall. We just harvested in beginning of July, and it stands almost, meter 70 tall as you are. If you are in the field, it's an impressive sight.
Yeah, I have pictures, but you can't really tell from this and from that the harvesting of the grain. But
that was actually rye. Yeah, 1 year to the next makes also a difference. This year it stood really high. It was really tall.
Okay. And sorry, Richard, did you have a follow-up to that?
I ramble. I'm sorry.
I do have another follow-up, actually. I don't know if you noticed that I was catching a little bit of water off. Oh, there we go. Off of my umbrella here. But I was just wondering how you, Patrick, drink your rye.
I usually like it neat because I enjoy that full-bodied nature of it. And I actually really like this is the older one. So this is the 9-10-year-old barrels. We also produce a younger one that is 4 or 5-year-old barrels that I select for that, which is actually a little bit fruitier. Of course, it has a little bit less depth of flavor because it's younger, but it's at the same time it's a little bit fruitier.
Thank you so much. And you know what? I'm going to use this from Ben. He said there must be a difference between Canadian, North American, and Dutch European rye. And he's asking that question. But I'm also going to add to that. You spoke earlier about the ryes that you pick or the grains you pick, and you're okay with spending more money as long as you get more flavor out of it. So I'm wondering, because let's put it all together. Let's ask his first. Is there a big difference between North American rye and European rye, the ones that you use?
I have never used a North American rye in my product, so I haven't distilled that. But I'm guessing the differences are not that big because don't forget that a lot of the Dutch and German settlers that brought the farming over to North America, both in Canada and in the US. A lot of those farmers came from Holland and Germany, and they brought their strains with them. So I'm guessing there must be a lot of genetic overlap between the different varieties.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Patrick, because I think a lot of people, Canadians specifically, I think they think, they think of, they think of Canadian whiskey, and rye is probably one of the first things that comes to mind. And I think a lot of people don't realize that like exactly what you said is that was actually brought over here, and it happened to grow really well over here, which is why we use it. Yeah. But I was gonna you filled it in, but I was gonna say I think, because they haven't done as much experimentation with it, like you mentioned, that I again, not a grain farmer, but I would imagine that they're very similar in terms of what you can get over there versus over here.
Yeah, there hasn't been that much genetic selection for rye as for wheat, for example. Also because wheat is, of course, a much more important grain for money-wise. So the money to be made in wheat is way more important. And rye always has been a poor man's grain. What do you use rye for? For whiskey and bread, a little bit of bread, and that's it. But most people prefer bread made from wheat. Yeah, same in Holland. Most of the bread we eat is from wheat.
I know we were sort of answering Richard's question there, so I don't want to jump the queue. But one of the things I did want to ask was you'd mentioned a lot of your mash bills so far have dealt with barley, corn, and rye. You haven't mentioned wheat, and I was just wondering if you use that in any of your products, or if there's a reason why you don't use it. But I don't know if Rich had, we'll let him wrap up first.
Did I answer your question, Richard?
Yeah, I think you did, actually. It was great. Yeah, thank you.
I tend to go off topic, so just...
That's all right. It's my job to bring us all back, so you don't worry about it. I'm here.
Tangents are beautiful. We love
that. But Josh, answering your question, wheat, of course, is a grain that is grown a lot here in Holland as well. Now, of course, these days the soils we have are much richer than they were 200 years ago because of fertilization opportunities that we have now that we didn't have 200 years ago. But wheat is also an interesting grain to use, of course. As a standalone grain, it's maybe a little bit boring flavor-wise because rye is that big, bold, in-your-face kind of grain, both in, if you make bread out of it, but also if you distill it. It's a big flavored grain. Wheat is a very, subtle flavor. It's gentle, it's nutty, it's light, it's fruity. So we distill because, and this is maybe a secret, but it's hereby probably fucked it up and it's out there. But we are aiming to produce a blended whiskey made with pot still distilled wheat-based grain whiskey. So we make.
Okay.
This year is the first year actually we grew our own wheat. This is the first year we grew our own wheat. Nice. And again, we got very small kernels of wheat to have more flavor. Good. And then we ferment it in very much the same way as we do the rye whiskey, and we make it into a double distilled, pot still distilled grain whiskey, basically. So it's dare I say it, more interesting than the Scottish grain whiskies, which are mostly used as filling for blended whiskies. This was specifically distilled as a flavorful whiskey. I'm sure that once it comes out of the barrel, you can drink it as such because the new make is actually really nice. But it's more subtle and fruity and delicate than the rye, of course.
And wheat has a great, actually, mouthfeel, and the pot still wheat would have even greater oilier.
It's actually really smooth. It's really gentle. It is even straight from the still. Sure. It is really gentle. It's actually amazingly gentle.
Is there like a cheat sheet you guys got to follow? And the only reason I mentioned that is because you'd mentioned that wheat is so heavily modified and there's so many different varieties of it. How do you, is there kind of like, hey, if you want to distill with wheat, these are the 3 varieties you have out of the 8,000 or whatever, 12, making up a number here. But
you have to select your variety for that fits the soil. So the variety that fits the where you are growing it, and it has to be resistant, of course, against disease, because you don't want to use what do you call that? the things you spray on, pesticides, and to prevent diseases. So, or at least you want as little as possible. So, because we are distilling this shit, it has to be. It cannot contain anything. At the moment we distill it, it cannot contain any of the pesticides that you spray on. So, you want varieties that are also able to stand up to your climate, your soil type, and are resistant to pests and yeast and molds and diseases. So that's that. And after that, of course, you want to select the variety that you like best for flavor.
Joss, did you want to finish that up? I cut you off before.
No, not at all. I mean, I could keep going, but I know I know you might want to take this conversation another direction. We can talk about wheat, I'm sure, ad nauseum. But yeah, thank you for that. That was very insightful.
Thank you, sir. But you've mentioned this a couple times. So you're choosing your wheat, and the cost is not an issue as long as you get flavor. So you have the smaller kernels, more flavor. But I want to know where the sweet spot is for you, because there's going to be a point where you don't want to spend that much money on the grain, because the cost of your per bottle is going to go skyrocketing, and you still have it. So what in your mind is your window?
To put that in perspective, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
Every bottle of spirit that you have behind you is about 1 kilo of grain, give or take. Yeah, some grains are a little bit better yield than the others, but give or take 1 kilo. So if that kilo of grain costs 26 cents or 40 cents or 60 cents, in the cost of that bottle, that is not that that big a deal, because let's be honest, there's 2 euros of energy cost in that bottle, and there is the bottle itself is somewhere between 60 cents and €1.20. So that's 60 or 40 or cents of grain, whether it's 60 or 40 or 30, is not the end of the world. Of course, if you do high volume production and all you do is then it makes a difference. But for mid-level distillers like us, I don't think it's that big a deal. You're better off. My father always told me when I was a little boy, I was like my son is now. I was probably 5-6 years old. My father always said, if it tastes good, I can sell it.
Good.
And that is what he said. You have to make products that taste as well as you can make them taste. And as long as you can do that, you will always be able to sell the products because they taste good. And there will be somebody that will think it's worth to spend that extra 20 cents or 50 cents on that bottle.
Okay, and resell it, to come back to it. And that's my segue into what I thought was going to be a long process. It's a subject that we've heard about a lot, and you talk about it in terroir. So I'm going to use a quote from you. So we're on the terroir train, gentlemen. Again, we've talked about this before, but we're going back. Here's a quote, if I can get it right here. There's the quote. So this is you. I do like this quote that I heard. It's important to have connection to where you're from, whether you call it terroir or not. There is a connection. So you tackle the issue a bit differently. You admit to believing in terroir, and you've taken steps to understand the issue better by working with fertilization, and I'll read this: seeding densities, soil competition, humidity factors, on top of deciding which grains to use, because we already talked about the grains and you're picking specific grains. But there's something else, and you mentioned this yourself: yeast, mash temperature, time, fermentation temperature and time, distillation speed, the amount of you charge your stills, like 60, 70, 80% full, the shape of the stills, the line arm, the type of condenser, the cut points, the filling strength, and the cask type all have to go in.
Don't forget the rate of distillation.
The
flow rate.
The flow rate. Are you going slow? You're doing your 7 days as opposed to 3. Okay. So can you control all of these elements to the point that you can repeat the result, because you say it's repetition that's important. It's time after time getting the same thing and be able to come and mentally relate to it. So can you repeat it year after year and get the same taste from the same farm or grains that
I hope so.
Okay.
But you can repeat everything but the taste of the grain, because let's be honest, during the growth season, there's things in the growth cycle that you can control. You can control how closely together you plant the seeds. You can control how much fertilization you put on that field. You can control the variety of grain that you put in the ground. So those are the factors you can control. What you cannot control is the amount of sunshine and the amount of rain that it gets. That is, up to the rye gods that have to decide whether they are laughing at you or not. So that variety there you have to deal with, because if in June the rye gets less rain, so a couple of years ago we had extremely dry, then the kernels are going to be even smaller than normal. Not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, it was probably the best rye I ever distilled. But that is very difficult to replicate, because I'm going to put a tent over the field to stop the rain from falling on it. So that is that is the same in wine production as well. Yeah. So if you talk about terroir in wine, you talk about the similarities that are the same year after year. And there has to be something that you can recognize, something that is repeatable year after year. And then, of course, that has to do with the soil, that has to do with the variety, that has to do with lots of things. But there's also factors that you cannot control. You have to be honest about these things. You cannot control the amount of sun, you cannot control the amount of rain. That is something that's up to the gods, or God, whatever your preference is. I'm very open about these things. I don't care. So that is something that has to be left to chance. I don't like it, but you cannot change it.
But if I have, and my wife's done this for me, I have quite a few ryes. Rye's my favorite of the whiskeys. It is, and I can pick yours out on a blind tasting very easily. My wife's tested me on it, and she's tried to do certain, especially recently with the other international whiskeys we have, which taste different from our traditional Canadian ones or some of the traditional American ones. I can pick it out. And I'm wondering if I'm picking out terroir in relationship to your stills and your style of producing the spirit, or am I picking out the grain? And that's the thing, because if I think
that's probably difficult to answer. I don't know that, because actually there's things that the terroir is there, but it's not one thing. The terroir is that combination of things. It's the soil, it's the variety, but it's also the wild yeast that are in the air in the distillery. That is the bacteria that inoculate your mash. It's the way you mash it. So terroir is for me a combination of things more than just the one thing, which is sometimes described as the soil type or whatever you want to call it. So this is where I also differ in opinion from my friends in Waterford, for example. Mark Renier is a big, and I love him for the fact that he is putting terroir on the map, but at the same time, the way he presents it is, and maybe he probably does that on purpose because he's a very smart man. So he probably he does it on purpose. But he says, "Here I've got a whiskey from this plot." And it tastes like this, and here I've got a whiskey from that plot, and it tastes like that, and therefore, ergo terroir, they are different. Ergo terroir exists. And that for me, I understand why he does it, but I don't agree with that, because terroir is more than that. It's also that what you hinted at before. It's that repeatability year after year. It's that you can recognize my rye, not just because it's from that soil type, but because it's made here. So it has roots in this distillery, in this ground, in this. It's not this plot is different from that plot and it tastes different, and ergo terroir exists. It also has to be something recognizable year after year, where you can say, okay, I can see this is from Chablis from 2 different years, but I can tell it's from the same house because they have similarities beyond the harvest.
Okay.
Am I
And-
rambling too much?
No, and it makes sense, but I'm still trying to come to grips with it, and I don't want to beat this horse any longer. You believe in terroir, and I do to a certain degree as well. I just don't know if it's distillery terroir or if it's land terroir, because
I agree with that.
many of us
Well,
can tell the difference between our favorites, different type of whiskeys, and is it because they get it from the same plot of land, or they get it all from bards and they just make it their unique way?
but it's also the question is whether that is important. I think
Okay.
I think what is important that you should be able to recognize your favorite distillery because you like the qualities of that product. And even if they don't grow their own grain, if they make awesome whiskey, who cares where they get the grain from?
Okay.
It's just that for me, I like to get my grain from here because of that sense of place that I want to also achieve.
And I do like the concept of grain to glass. I really do. Farm to glass, I love that concept, and I really hope it is. But it's I don't want to say terroir is in its infancy with Scotch or whiskey, but people believing in it is pretty well in its infancy. So I want to see how we believe or what we think in 5 years. I'd love to jump forward and see where we get with this. But
I think, like you said, terroir is real. Yeah, there is no denying that you can recognize certain distilleries. And what you said, whether that's from that because they buy the grain from the same place, or because of the bacteria in the air in that distillery, or the wild yeast that inoculates the mash, or the way they distill it.
Yeah.
The question is that really important? It's important for me, but for you, as you have that product in your glass, what the fuck do you care? It has to taste good. That is the one thing. It has to taste good.
We're spending money on it. We want it to be good, and I agree. And what the fuck does it matter? Let's leave it at that. That's a good quote. We're done, gentlemen. Let's talk about this rye right now. And I've talked about it too much. I just want to say I loved it from the first time I tried it, especially the Kensington Wine Market. It had an orangey note to it, a very pronounced orange note, which is not in here. It's subtle now. And I'm going to leave it to you two gentlemen to talk about this rye, please. So either one of you.
I'm going to jump in first because I think Josh probably has a lot more knowledge on rye whiskey than I have. So, again, rye, this is sort of a new journey for me, and I've really appreciated from Craftworks and Dolph this having the ability to taste 10, 11, 12, I don't know how many ryes we've had through the Canadian whiskey journey and the international whiskey journey. But there's been a lot, and it's opened my eyes up to the differences of rye, and I've been able to start to identify the types of rye that I'm starting to like at this stage in my journey. I'm picking up a lot of sort of orange marmalade on it, some bergamot or bergamot, and there's the spices that I like in the ryes that I like is present in this as well. That creamy, oily mouthfeel is really important to me, and that's got it in spades, as well as a higher ABV, and it just carries that weight of the flavor so much better. So I'm really, really enjoying this. When Dolph and I were chatting on the side, and he was saying this is one of my favorite whiskeys, or my favorite whiskey of ever, of rye of ever, and I sent him a note back a couple of days ago when I first got this from Yarka, that he was right. This is stunning rye, and I feel so privileged to be able to have this opportunity to experience ryes of this quality. So thank you. That's what I pick up on it. Yum.
It's fucking hard to do though. Rye rye whiskey in a pot still. Ask any distiller in the world, and they'll say, "Oh, rye whiskey in a pot still. This guy must be crazy." Because doing a rye whiskey, because it's have you ever wallpapered your house, Richard? Well, have you seen how wallpaper paste looks like? The rye mash is like that. It's like 15,000 liters or 30,000 liters of wallpaper paste. And then you try telling Richard Forsyth you're going to pump that wallpaper paste in your still, and you don't want it to burn. You know, that is the challenges that you face if doing rye whiskey in a pot still. And I think people don't really, see the difficulty, and they don't have to, because, like you said, at the end of the day, it just matters on what's in the glass, and that has to be good. Whether I have a nice story how I make it or not doesn't matter. No matter how nice the story is, it has to taste right. But the way we make it this way, we make it in this pot still because we like that creamy mouthfeel. We like that big flavor and that spiciness that you get more from a pot still distillation than from a column distillation.
Patrick, the one thing that I don't get from this that I thought I would in a pot still is when I make beer with rye, because I make beer with rye and it is horrible to work with. Even
also challenging.
20%. It just chars. It burns so quickly. You don't have to bring the beer to a boil before it starts burning on you. So, Joss, sorry, I interrupted you, Joss. I'll get back to that later. I just want to know how you stop that charring and the flavor in there. But Joss has to still talk about what he thought about this. So we're going to do that. Sorry, Josh.
No, not at all. No, I was thinking, I'm glad you touched upon the rye and homebrew, because I totally, anything more than 15% in your mash bill, and yeah, you're in trouble. Your pumps are getting clogged, all that kind of fun stuff. I also quickly wanted to comment on the terroir and Waterford. I'm glad you mentioned that, Patrick. And I actually kind of like that we're in its infancy. We're still kind of defining what terroir. I mean, we kind of know what terroir is, but I think that what you were kind of alluding to is that it extends beyond the farm plot. It goes into the process. And that kind of ties in what I was mentioning earlier with the, every distillery kind of has that fingerprint, that's like it has its own terroir, which encompasses a lot of those individual elements. Back to the rye, Craftworks Greg mentioned there in a comment below that this is probably closest out of all the ryes we've tried so far, and by far the American and the Canadian ryes, which are typically a lot. They're spicier. They're very bold. They're very strong. You almost have to water them down just to kind of get them to that palatable point. This is very fruity. This is very palatable. This is easy to drink. You can get it on the nose. You can get it in the palate. You can get it in the finish. You're not overcome with spice and those wood notes. And it's interesting that I wonder if it's it really comes down to the is it a North American rye, and it's interesting to find out that European or maybe this is just a Dutch thing. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of there's a lot of those. You guys try to include those oils, and I really like that. That being said, really quickly, when I first poured this, I actually got grape on the nose, which was kind of exciting because I know this wasn't finished in any kind of a wine cask. It does have those signature elements of vanilla and cereal that you would get on a rye. Obviously very fruity, which I love because I love Moscatel casks. And this is great, and I love fruit bombs. So this is right in my, again, brings me back to what I love. And again, on the finish, it's some of the ryes we've tried earlier in this multi-segment series we've been doing with Dolph and Richard. Have you might get a bit of a nose, you have a good palate, and then bang, you just get smashed with that heat and that spice, which can be great. It can be fun, but this just kind of it's a nice ride the whole way through. It doesn't kick you in the ass, and also loving all the F-bombs we've been having during this session as well. That's made it I think it goes with a good ride.
Yeah,
that's it. That's my spiel.
And brash. It's good. All right. And anything else to add to it, Patrick, that we forget? For me, it's the floral notes that distinguish this from others. And like I said, I can pick this out from a range, and I probably have about 40 or 50 ryes opened. And
but I think the essence that you are referring to, the floral notes and the fruity aspects of this rye, they also come from the fermentation, of course. Not the 40-hour quick fermentation, but that long, slow, cool fermentation drags out that ester formation already in the fermenter. So in the fermentation tank, already that the start of that esterification is there. And you're already starting with a beer, or whatever you want to call it, wash, beer, mash, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. That beer is already full of all kinds of different esters, because we leave it long enough to get that malolactic fermentation also in there. But then you put it in a pot still, and then the big advantage of that pot still distillation is that you can also, because you're taking out that the forerun cut, the first 200-300 liters, you take away, and we put back into the distillation next day. So you take out the forerun and the afterrun, and you keep the middle cut to put in the casks. But that forerun is redistilled the next day. So you bring those esters that are in that cut, you bring them back into contact with that copper. You heat them up again. And what you get is that those esters degrade, they break down, and they reform new esters. So out of that, a lot of the esters in the forerun is ethyl acetate, which of course is glue-like, acetone-like, and not very nice ester.
I still like it.
But if you redistill that day after day, day after day, day after day, you get these wonderful floral and fruity notes from those same esters. And that is something you actually cannot do with a column distillation, because column distillation, the mash goes through the column, and that's it. You cannot cut, you cannot bring back. So you have to do with whatever comes out of the column. So you can play with the setup of the column, you can play with all kinds of things. But in a pot still distillation, you actually take that forerun cut and the after run, and you bring it back into the next distillation run. And you keep doing that endlessly. So you actually, the longer you do it, the more complex your middle cut becomes, because some of that will spill over into the middle cut.
And change over time and modify.
And it will change over time. And then you put it in a barrel. And then you get that interaction between the wood and the new make. So the different chemicals that are in that new make, the esters, the higher alcohols, they will interact with each other, but also with the oak lactones that you take out of the wood. And that gives that strange orange note that you find in some of my whiskeys. That is something we do wrong with all our whiskeys, that orange note, but that keeps popping up everywhere.
It makes me happy, Patrick. It really does. Don't get rid of it.
Exclusive for American oak aged whiskeys. It also pops up in my malt whiskey if I age it in American oak.
Okay.
So it's something we do wrong in all our whiskeys.
Good. Keep it up. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to board our very last question of the day. So, and it starts with another quote, and I don't get to put quotes on often enough. I really like my quotes. It makes me feel good, like I've done a lot of research. So here we go. There it is. There's the quote. So when they come back the next day and say, that was nice, I'll have another bottle. It makes it worth it. But they have to go and tell their mates as well. That's what you need, for people to do the talking for you. And that comes from making products that people love to drink. Now, I don't believe you have a visitor center or give tours. Is that correct, Patrick?
No.
Okay. So I'm wondering if you've considered this as a future extension, because you keep spending money every year to your business so that you can create brand ambassadors of all your visitors. So let the spirit speak to the customers, who will in turn do the marketing for you.
True. No, visitor centers, of course, are very important in our business. But yeah, we always have been a very production-focused company. Yeah? So we haven't been focused on marketing or any of that shit. We've always been focusing on, making nice products. Because the quote that you give there was actually something my father, beat into us. I don't want to say that because he never beat us, but that was instilled in us from a very early age. He says, unless you have an unlimited marketing budget, you need people. You need to make products that people want to buy, and then they have to come back to that retailer and say, "Whoa, this you sold me. I like it. I'm gonna buy a bottle for my best friend, and I'm gonna let him taste it." And that's actually what you need to have people come back and buy another bottle of this of the product and do the marketing for you.
Yeah. Well, because we've talked to people, and you spoke about Cotswolds and Cotswolds. So Zor, one of his main focus was that he knew when he was opening, he was going to have that he was going to have that place for people to relax after the tour. But the tour, they would make that a central focus to how they were going to distribute their whiskey in the future, always knowing that someone that loved your stuff would talk to their brother, they would talk to the cousin and bring someone else in. Do you have the room in that area?
Yeah, we have the space and the room. It's just that the focus has always been on the production. That's my fault. Can I put my hand up? That's my fault. I'm a production geek.
Okay.
And I like talking to people, but giving tours all day long is not probably my forte.
Oh, it wouldn't be you. You'd hire someone that looks like Santa Claus or something, and he would have a Scottish accent. Maybe, I don't know, because for some reason, even in Canada, they have Scottish accents when they're selling our whiskey. It's just really funny. But anyways, it's good. I would love to do that.
Are you volunteering for the job? Because
you want to hire me? I will leave my job as a teacher right now, and I'll go there and I'll give those things. I'll do it. You got it, buddy. And as long as you pay me very well and give me a lot of this, right?
That is enough. There's enough of that. There's about 12,000 cost of that aging somewhere in a warehouse. So.
Okay, so I'll have so that'll be part of my negotiation in my contract.
Well,
I get to choose a cask.
I'm sure we can make it work.
Okay, good. Done. Gentlemen, any last comments? We'll go through it, and we'll start with Joss, then Rich, and then we'll end with our man of the hour.
I think I covered most of that in my last 5-minute, 3,000 word essay there. But again, I just wanted to say, really enjoying this rye, which I thought actually wouldn't like as much as the PX, but it might be surpassing it now. Great job. Looking forward to getting some stuff in when you guys have some new releases there in Alberta. Definitely going to try and track down that KWM cask Dolph if I can, if they're floating out there in the ether.
That's a cost strength one, so that's very interesting.
But if not, then definitely looking forward to some new fun releases. Thank you so much for your time, Patrick. It's been very educational and a lot of fun. And I will pass over to Rich.
Thank you, Joss.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Joss. Thank you, Dolph, Greg, and Yarka. I think I've bought, other than sort of mixing ryes for in-laws and people like that, I think I bought one other bottle of rye in my life, and that was from Shelter Point way back when. It was from Alberta Distillers that Shelter Point bottled. I'm going to be going out and buying some of this. I don't have a lot of good quality ryes around, and this is certainly up there. I'm loving it. So, and I'm a peat head, and I have to say, Joss, I like the rye better than the PX, the peated PX, and I love the peated PX, but this one I'm going to have to find and buy. So thank you, Patrick. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. And just as a small comment, if you could make a peated rye,
now you're sounding like my brother.
So happy. Thank you.
My
in a muscatel cask.
Pestering me for that. Oh, actually, I do have some rye in muscatel cask.
Ooh.
But it's still aging.
That'll be good.
But we do have some rye in muscatel cask aging. I want to thank you guys for your kindness and for having me on this show. I want to thank Greg and Yarka as well for organizing everything with you. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, kind sir. And it comes to an end every week. That's all the time we have today, Whiskey Brothers, Whiskey Sisters, and Whiskey Friends. It's been a fantastic afternoon. Thanks to our listeners, many listeners today. Thank you so much. Special thanks to our panel. So Joss here, and let's do it over there in the corner, and Rich. And special thank you to this gentleman right here, because without Patrick, we wouldn't be here today, and it was so fun. And let's add what we have on the bottom. Special thank you to Greg and Yarka. Sorry, I was trying, the K from Yarka went into Greg. It's been fantastic. Without you guys, we're not getting this fantastic spirit. And without you, I wouldn't have had my favorite whiskey, my favorite rye of all time 3 years ago, I think is when it came up. Join us next Saturday, September 18th, 11 o'clock again, which is 7 o'clock p.m. for our guests in Copenhagen. We'll be completing. It'll be the very end of our 10-week whiskey or international whiskey journey. And we've got Marcus Christensen of Copenhagen Distillery. Looking forward to it. You should too. Final note, if you don't want to miss anything, click like, click subscribe. Gentlemen, raise a glass with me, if you could, please. Here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey. Here's the good conversation. And here's to seeing y'all next week. Sláinte, everybody.
Here's the good friends.
Good
Sláinte.
friend.